Our candidates this evening are for State Representative District 36B, I always trip over this part. We have Melissa Hortman and Peter Crema. For Representative 40A, we have Michael Nelson. For Senate District 36, we have Jeffrey Lundy and John Hoffman. And for Senate District 40, we have Robert Marvin and Chris Eaton. Melissa Hortman was unable to join us this evening, but I do have her statement that she provided, and I will read that at this time. Thank you to the North Hennepin Area Chamber and the League of Women Voters for hosting tonight's forum. I regret that I'm unable to attend, as I had a long-standing commitment to be outside of the state of Minnesota this evening. I am honored to serve the communities of Brooklyn Park and Coon Rapids in the Minnesota House of Representatives, and pleased my work funded the completion of Highway 610, the Coon Rapids Dam repair, and the North Star commuter rail line. Perhaps more importantly, our children now receive more fair funding in the state's allocation of money for our K-12 schools. I am now most focused on making college education more affordable and more accessible. All Minnesota students who want to go to college should be able to go and to graduate without excessive student debt. For more information about my campaign and my priorities, please visit my website at melissahortman.com. I'm sorry I can't be with all of you this evening, but please feel free to get in touch with me directly through my website if you have any questions for me. Thank you so much. Sincerely, Melissa Hortman. So now we will go to our questions that our candidates received in advance. First one is, please tell us about your background and previous civic involvement that support your candidacy for this position. Our first responder will be Mr. Peter Crema.
Thank you. Before I discuss my civic involvement and qualifications, I'd like to thank the North Hennepin Chamber and the League for sponsoring this event tonight and for allowing me a chance to participate. My wife and I, and now children, have lived in Brooklyn Park for almost 20 years, and we've been actively involved in this community for that whole period. I chaired the Brooklyn Park Charter Commission for 5 years. I was then asked to run for the City Council, and I have successfully, and I believe well, served this city for 8 years, 2 terms. I am a member of the Elks Lodge in Brooklyn Park. I've been a supporter of Brooklyn Area Babe Ruth and Brooklyn Park Athletic Association. My kids both played in those programs, and even though they're no longer in them, I still volunteer my time through fundraisers and other activities. I'm a member of the Champlin Football Club, the Booster Club. I am a member of the liaison team for the 10th grade football team. And as I said, I've coached baseball and football in this city, and I want to continue my involvement and support of this community.
Thank you. Mr. Michael Nelson.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Michael Nelson, and I too want to thank the Chamber and the League for holding this forum. I also want to thank all the residents of Brooklyn Park who have sent me to the legislature and have allowed me that privilege and honor. I've lived in Brooklyn Park, Brooklyn Center most of my life. I grew up here, graduating from Park Center High School and Hennepin Technical College. I also participated with my sons in the Brooklyn Park Athletic Association when they were little, and I was a local Boy Scout leader. I also was very active in my Carpenters local, serving in many leadership positions. In the legislature, I've served on many committees. Most recently, I've been the lead on the Government Operations and Elections Committee. And this last year, in that role, we worked across the aisle with the other members of the committee, and we passed a bill that reduced the cost of special elections to local governments, and at the same time made it easier for citizens to vote. And that's important, and keeping the integrity of our election system is important, and it's paramount in maintaining their trust in our local governments. I will continue to work hard on these and other issues and that are important to all of us.
Thank you. Mr. Jeffrey Lundy.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all the people who helped put these debates on. I think it's good for people to be able to come to events like this, hear people speak and ask questions. My name is Jeff Lundy. I'm currently the mayor of Brooklyn Park, having served 6 years. Prior to that, I was on the council for 4. I'm proud to also be a founding member of the President Obama's My Brother's Keeper initiative, which is helping to look after those gaps that affect African American and Latino youth. I'm also a national advocate for after-school policies, taking that out to many places about what we do in Brooklyn Park and advocating for the fact that this can drive results. I'm a member of the Met Council Transportation Advisory Board and also the Blue Line Coalition, the Corridor Management Committee, where I help make decisions on the Blue Line and planning for it. Most proud of am I of my family, my wife, and my two sons who are proud members of the Jackson and Champlain Brooklyn Park Academy. I've volunteered as a football coach at Jackson Middle School and am very involved with the Lacrosse Youth Association for the Rebels.
Thank you. Mr. John Hoffman.
Thank you to the Chamber and thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting these forums. And I want to tell you that my wife Yvette and our daughter Hope have lived in Champlain for 16 years. We moved to Champlain because of the educational opportunities for my daughter as well as educational opportunities for other students. And that's where I got involved with the local community. And there was started off as a parent volunteer in the school district. Eventually, I became elected to the school board and served 4 years as its vice chair. And prior to that election, though, I was appointed to the Federal Interagency Coordinating Council, where I advised cabinet members on health and human services and education issues under U.S. Secretary of Education Rodney Page. That federal experience helped me on the local experience with our school district and school board. Since my election in 2012, I serve on education, finance policy, health and human services, policy, as well as the vice chair of environment and energy. And you know, that keeps going on because the involvement that was there with the federal and the local has helped within the state. And thank you for letting me be here this evening.
Thank you. Mr. Robert Marvin.
Thank you. My name is Robert Marvin. I wanted to also thank the League of Women Voters of the North Hennepin Chamber of Commerce for hosting this event. I also wanted to thank Senator Chris Eaton for attending, and it's a pleasure for me to be here. My wife Molly and I moved to this area 21 years ago. My family moved to this area 30 years ago. My mom still lives up in the East Ward, up near the river. My sister lives not too far from the Elks Club in the center, and my cousin lives in the center of Brooklyn Park as well. I got 3 boys we raised in Brooklyn Center. My youngest one's 17, my middle one's 19, my oldest one's 21. They all attended public schools in the area. Most of them went to Fair School in Crystal. 2 of my boys wound up being kind of leaders of their own in terms of being presidents of National Honor Society and so forth. One of my sons wound up being on the Brooklyn's Youth Council. So our family's been active in all sorts of stuff. And I serve on all kinds of national committees for the Engineering Council. I do a lot of things, so thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Chris Eaton.
Hi, I'm Chris Eaton. I'm current senator of Senate District 40. I've lived in Brooklyn Center for the last 26 years with my husband of 35 years, Tim Wilson, the mayor of Brooklyn Center. We had 2 children and currently have 1 grandchild. When my children were growing up, I participated in the Brooklyn Center Little League and volunteered in their schools. We lost my daughter in 2007 to addiction when she died from a heroin overdose. Addiction and opioid epidemic have become the focus of my work in the Senate. I'm a registered nurse and a lifelong Democrat. I ran for this Senate seat in the special election in 2011 following Senator Linda Scheid's death due to cancer. I immediately joined the Cancer Caucus in the Senate and currently co-chair it. I was reelected in 2012 and I'm running for another term. I would greatly appreciate your support. And I also want to thank everyone for being here and the Chamber and the League for putting this together and all the candidates for coming.
Thank you. Minnesota's transportation infrastructure is in dire need of funding for repairs and new roads. How would you propose funding road and bridge repairs and new road construction projects over the next 10 years? First responder will be Mr. Nelson.
Thank you. We have a history in Minnesota of paying for our roads with a user fee that we're all familiar with. It's called the gas tax. And what that does is that as you drive, the more you drive, the more you pay because it's based on the mileage. And it's a pay-as-you-go system, so we're not borrowing a lot of money ahead of time and then having to pay it back later. And I think that's a good system that we have. Unfortunately, recently the gas tax hasn't kept up as well as it has in the past, partly because of the number of the cars are getting better gas mileage, and the number of cars out there that are all electric are increasing. And so there have been ways that they've looked at a mileage-based tax as opposed to the gas tax. And there's some states that are doing some work on that, experimenting with that and seeing how it goes. But currently, and in the immediate future, we'll be using the gas tax to pay for it, and I support that. I would support an increase in the gas tax, which, and a lot of people, nobody wants to say that, but we do need to do more money in the system to pay for our roads, and the federal government's not bringing any more money into that, so.
Thank you. Mr. Lundy?
I think, first of all, we should acknowledge the fact that when you're in a hole, you stop digging. And the failure of this legislature to pass a bonding bill has made a 10-year problem into a 12-year problem. And so whatever challenges we've been facing are now compounded by that failure to act. I think first and foremost, we pass a bonding bill, and if people don't get everything they want, that is okay, because the art of working together is that you're not going to get everything you want. But to get nothing, I know this much, the people of Minnesota got nothing. And they didn't get the transportation bill they deserved or needed. There were many projects that were not funded. Brooklyn Park has projects coming up that have not yet reached. We're farther in the back of the line because of that. I do not support an increase in the gas tax. When I've been out door knocking, I've heard one message over and over again, is that seniors who haven't got COLA for many years are facing increased prices. Gas tax hits everyone. It hits your food, it hits all kinds of bills. And if we're really serious about delivering tax relief, we have to look at what we're taking out, the indirect taxes.
Thank you. Mr. Hoffman?
Our transportation system is desperately in need of repair. In fact, there's an estimate that the bridges and roads that need a repair are about $600 million a year. In terms of funding sources, all options need to be on the table. And let me talk about some of those. When we look at federal funding for projects in Minnesota, we must maximize that opportunity, because sending federal tax dollars, the money that you put in through paying your taxes, sending federal tax dollars to other states is not okay. You're competing against those other states, and leaving that money on the table is just plain stupid. Now, there are other ways that we can look in Minnesota to pay for this, which is we have GO bonds, you have a transportation trunk highway bonds, and also paying some of that through the general fund that is left over from taxes on the car parts and auto sales parts. That's something that can be looked at. I want to be honest, though. I don't support taking general fund revenue from the Osseo and the Anoka-Hennepin schools districts to meet the transportation obligations. That money must stay where it's desperately needed, health and human services and education.
Thank you. Mr. Marvin?
I like that Senator Hoffman mentioned bonds as being part of the thing that we need to use for funding roads. Traditionally, it's right, we get a lot of our funding for roads and bridges and so forth from the gas tax. But this year we had a kind of a scandal with this letter that Senator Hoffman and Senator Eaton signed that kind of sabotaged our bonding bill. And that comes up a lot in all the other debates across the state of Minnesota. A lot of the other senators, especially even the Democrat ones, are upset about it. And it's really important for us to, first things first, is to pass our bonding bills and work out our differences. And we had a wide bipartisan support for that. And they ended up kind of hijacking that for Southwest Light Rail. And as far as our roads and bridges and for funding our roads and bridges, constitutionally we have the funding was based on a gas tax, and we do have higher and higher usages all the time, and there is potentially need for us to get additional sources of funding for these, and we'll have to talk about that. But to me, first thing first is to pass our bonding bills.
Ms. Eaton?
Well, I'm a strong supporter of raising the gas tax. The gas at the pump changes, the price changes almost daily. I don't think most people would even notice the difference. It's a dedicated funding source to repair our roads and bridges. I object to the proposal to use general fund dollars. They are greatly stretched as it is to cover education and health care. Our dedicated transportation funds have fallen short for many reasons. Some is because the cars are more efficient, and some is that some cars don't use gas at all. We last passed a transportation bill, I believe in 2008, when with a veto override of then Governor Pawlenty. 8 years later, we're even more behind in maintaining the infrastructure of our roads and bridges. All these pent-up needs are more expensive than they were 8 years ago. We need to pass a comprehensive transportation bill this session.
Mr. Kramer?
Thank you. I typically am a strong proponent for user fees. I believe you pay as you go for what you use. However, I'm not a strong proponent, I'm not a proponent at all, for an increased gas tax. as Mr. Lundy said, a gas tax hits everyone, and it hits those that can least afford to pay the increase, even if it's only a few pennies a gallon. It hits our seniors that are on a fixed income. It hits our students that are going to school, that are going to part-time jobs. And so it's just one of those hidden fees that nobody ever sees it because, well, it's just paid at the pump. But it's constantly going up. We need to look at those sources to come up with additional revenues. Government has a few things it must do really well, and roads and bridges are one of them, and it's not being done well right now. One alternative to consider is dedicate some sales tax money from auto accessory parts. You buy your antifreeze, there's a sales tax. Include some of that money to go into it. That would generate, I believe the number is $160 million additional dollars over 10 years. So long and short, I do not support an increase in the gas tax.
Next question. Do you support the light rail projects being proposed, like Bottineau and Southwest? Why or why not? Our first responder is Mr. Lundy.
I think I'm going to create an act of heresy, is I'm going to actually disagree with my party on this. And I think this makes me an ideal candidate for the state Senate. I do support the blue light rail line. As mayor, I have worked on that issue closely. I've served on the corridor management committee. I made sure, and I hit the pause button by making the motion to say Maplebrook wasn't getting the answers to their questions. And so we hit a year-long pause to say, until we get those answers, we're not going to give municipal consent. I know what light rail can do for our city, and as a senator to represent this area, I know that it's going to provide the ability for people in parts of our city to get to education at the college and the library, and then further on to get up to 610 and complete that cycle and get jobs. I will support the blue line if I'm elected state senate. I believe that it's that kind of idea and that will to get things done that will serve me well as your state senator, because I will work across party lines. I will do what matters and get things done.
Mr. Hoffman?
I was instrumental in getting the first bonding bill that put funding toward the Bottineau Blue Line, which is an extension of what we need to do on the light rail projects moving forward. And in the conversation, we must remember that building the blue line is not just building a single line, but we're building a network. And when you look at building a network, you have to think about it regionally. And the way the Federal Transportation Authority and the way regional federal dollars go is they look at a state to say, how are you doing this collaboratively? How are you doing this as a network? What are you doing to assure that it's a statewide response or a regional response? And leaving federal dollars on the table, like I said earlier, is not very prudent on our part. And so we are 50 years behind when it comes to a multimodal transportation system. And we're now projected to battle this against people like San Diego and Portland. But here's the thing that's smart about this. The business community agrees on this. And let me be very clear. We did pass the bonding bill in the Senate with 18 Republican folks voting with us on that as well. And in that wasn't just about Bottineau, but it was also about the East Gateway, but it was a regional look. It was collaborative regional, which is multimodal, and that's where we need to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Marvin?
Well, this issue is a complicated one. Of course, that letter I keep looking at, whenever I talk to people about this, that letter always comes up. People are really upset about that and how we didn't get the bonding bill passed primarily because of Southwest Light Rail. I think the light rail, we need multimodal. We need multimodal transportation. We need buses. We need fiscally, we need transportation that's economically feasible. And I know the light rail, for example, is $1.8 billion. And they're increasing ridership on the Southwest one I'm talking, 6,500, and that winds up being about $300,000 per additional rider. And if you go looking around to see what you can buy for $300,000 per rider, you can get some pretty fancy cars. You can get like Lamborghinis and so forth. If you want to go get 4 riders in a car, you can get yourself a nice Bugatti. And to me, it's kind of unrealistic to spend that much money for that. Whereas in the event, we could go buy some really nice natural gas powered buses, and the buses are more flexible in many respects in terms of being able to go exactly where you want them to go. Thank you.
Ms. Eaton?
Yeah, I fully support all the transit options that we have. By 2040, we will add 900,000 more residents and 570,000 more jobs to the metro area. Road congestion is only going to get worse. Without multimodal transit systems, our region will lose out on new young workers that other cities like Seattle, Portland, Denver, and Salt Lake City are attracting. because they've invested in their transit systems. Industries in our area are already facing workforce shortages. Not investing in transit means risking our growing economy in Minnesota.
Mr. Kramer.
Thank you. I want to separate this into two questions, and that is Southwest and Bottineau. I will confess I've read the newspaper stories about Southwest. I don't know the stories well enough to really comment. But I think we need to fix the issues in the light rail before we start building the lines. And what I mean by that is light rail in Southwest, the price has gone up, the amenities and the stops have been reduced. And so we need to solve those issues before we, break ground or start breaking ground on the other one. This is a wheel-spoke transportation system, and it's only going to work appropriately if all the spokes are built in. I mean, once the first line was built, the rest needed to be built to make it work. And I have some questions about the Bottineau line. I mean, I sat here and I voted yes on municipal consent for the Bottineau line. But I think we need to figure out a better system to make sure everybody's paying for the rides when they get on. I think we need to adjust rates up a bit to help defray the operating cost of the line, and maybe looking at a little bit of a way to defray the expenses. Instead of having a train every 7 minutes, make it every 12 minutes, just to reduce those expenses and make it a viable option.
Thank you. And Mr. Nelson.
Yes, I've been a supporter of the Southwest and the Bottineau since the beginning. In the legislature, Representative Hortman and myself were two key individuals on the House to making sure that we, as this progressed, that the line came out to Brooklyn Park and came out to where it's now proposed to end. My office at the Capitol, I have a map of the old streetcar lines, which was the light rail system that we had in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And they were tore up in the 50s and in the 60s. And if you look at that map, they all end except for they had a line that went to Anoka, they had a line to Hastings, out to Excelsior, and up to Stillwater. We had a system that if we had kept that system operating as we went along, as our suburbs grew, we would have this, we wouldn't be having this discussion, this argument about light rail. So we need to have a system that's with buses and light rail, so that our transportation is more comprehensive than it is. And we've underfunded it for years. And so I mean, that's the little thing there. We've not paid, for years we have not paid enough money to get this thing up and operating as the comprehensive system that it should be.
Thank you. Do you support further reduction in taxes for residents and businesses? Why or why not? If so, which taxes do you want to see reduced? First responder is Mr. Hoffman.
Nobody enjoys or wants to raise taxes. And you know what? One of the things we need to do, and I'm going to be honest and fully transparent, because I supported for voting an income tax increase on the top income earners in the state of Minnesota. And what that meant was that they were not paying their fair share according to the middle income earners. And of the 80,000 folks that we represent here in Senate District 36, that accounted for 742 people. And the thing that it got to was it was a $250,000 of profit. And so that became the taxable income side of that. That was a good start. And one of the things that we need to look at is my least favorite is property tax. I think you need to really look at the fact, because property tax is not based upon the ability to pay. And with that, in the last 4 years, I have supported about $500 million in property tax relief for this reason. And some of that was reincorporating the local government aid to cities. And in our Senate district, that was $7.5 million, $3.6 million right here to the city of Brooklyn Park that should have gone to address some of those property tax increases that were there. It was the first time that we did that in 2013. And so
thank you. Your time has expired.
Oh, I'm sorry, and
That's
thank
okay.
you very much.
Yeah, Mr. Marvin.
Oh, this is one of my favorite subjects. And my people that I talk to are always complaining about the taxes, and I suspect everybody's like that. In Brooklyn Center, unfortunately, we have basically one of the highest tax rates in the entire state. Brooklyn Park is also pretty highly taxed. Brooklyn Center's tax rates are, I'm talking about property tax rates, are 10.5% higher than Minneapolis, and Brooklyn Parks are only 11% lower than Minneapolis. So the property taxes in both Brooklyn Park and Brooklyn Center are high, but Brooklyn Park is a lot better than Brooklyn Center in terms of that. And then one of the things that they always talk about is local government aid as being a way to compensate everybody for property tax relief. And what the average per capita cost for LGA is $1,507, but Brooklyn Center only gets an average of $1,244 per capita for that, and Brooklyn Park only gets $1,094. So basically, we're only getting a small fraction of this piece of the pie. And our representatives and senators need to be fighting for our fair share of that. If we're going to be doing LGA as a way to do that, we need to be fighting for our local residents, Brooklyn Center, Brooklyn Park. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Eaton?
I have and do support tax relief for middle-class families and small businesses. I am a member of the tax committee. I supported expanding the working families tax credit, providing a tax credit for student loan debt, the 529 college plan tax credit, and child and dependent care tax credit. I also support property tax relief for small businesses and farmers, which was a key part of our tax bill that was vetoed. It included $140 million in investment in decreasing the small business property tax, and it exempted the first $100,000 of commercial industrial property value from the tax while reducing the total levy so that the cost wasn't shifted to other businesses. The increase in LGA would help with property taxes for everyone and allow local governments to budget more effectively. I'm hoping that we can pass that bill in January.
Mr. Crema?
Thank you. I do support tax relief and tax reductions for businesses and individuals in the area. In 2013, we had the largest tax increase in 30 years. We cannot keep taxing and taxing and expect our citizens to keep paying it. At some point, there becomes a breaking point. I know the budget in Brooklyn Park, for example, has gone up, but look at the positive results you've seen as residents in the last 8 years. Crime is at a 30-year low. Investment in infrastructure is up. We have increased development. We've made positive strides with showing increased revenue. However, on a state level, we cannot sustain that. A couple of things, the question asked, how would you suggest reducing taxes? Minnesota is one of only 13 states that charges tax on Social Security. Seniors that can least afford on a fixed income paying taxes. That's one tax I would propose we get rid of. Young people that are just starting out, another tax, a group of individuals that are taxed that can least afford it. I'd start increasing deductions for, sorry, my time is up, for student loan interest. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson?
Thank you for the question. I kind of feel this is the wrong question to ask because we always start here as politicians, they want us to promise we're going to lower your taxes, we're going to increase your services, and it's not going to cost you anything. And that's kind of a false promise that people want to hear. They feel good about hearing that. If we want to reduce taxes, we need to look at what we're providing as services as a government to the people, to the citizens of the state of Minnesota. And if the citizens of the state of Minnesota say, I don't want my roads plowed, I don't want my kids to go to a good school, I don't want my roads repaired, I don't want this, then we can lower taxes down to nothing. But our citizens have decided that they want a certain amount of services and we have to pay for those. Just like at the city where they figure out this is what we're going to spend our money on, and then they set the levy. We should be doing it at the state also. But again, it's got to be an honest conversation, and it has not been that in the past, and it probably won't be in the future either. But we have to have an honest conversation. What services do you want, and then how are we going to pay for those? And we should do that with a fair system that's progressive, so that the people that can pay make the least can pay the least.
Thank you. Mr. Lundy?
I like the idea of an honest conversation. I think when you have tax relief that gets bottled up because of partisanship, that doesn't pass because people are too busy having fun pointing fingers. I sit as mayor, and we don't have the time nor the inclination to wait and hope that things are going to get better next election. You need to get stuff done now. I don't know of any employer that's going to say, well, you tried, you tried to do something, we're going to keep you around. You get stuff done or you don't. When I talk to business owners, they talk about the taxes. It's not just what they have to pay, it's the regulations that go into it. The tax increase also included, we also raised car tabs. I don't know about you, but I pay car tabs and it doesn't matter about my income level. You have to pay clothing tax, sales tax, cigarette tax, tax, and tax. So it's not just the income tax that's important. If you drive up the cost of people to live here, it's one of the reasons people decide to look elsewhere. It's why seniors are struggling and students are, because you're driving up the cost of everything. And that is what's killing us.
Our next question, before we move on to the audience ones. Do you support Governor Dayton's early childhood vision to provide taxpayer-funded all-day pre-kindergarten for every 4-year-old in the state? Why or why not? If so, how would you like to see this delivered? If, for example, exclusively through public schools, through mix of public schools, private schools, child care centers, etc. Our first responder will be Mr. Marvin.
My family is really big on education. We love education. If you listen to my wife, she always talks about and she raves about the education, how education. My wife grew up in China, and when she was in China, basically she was born in. I'm not going to say when she was born because I'll get in trouble for that, but I'll be in trouble. But anyway. Back when she was born, it was only 1% of females that got to go to college. You had to pass an exam, and so and she wound up being one of these that did that. And we always tried to get our children to be going to kindergarten. We tried to get them involved in early education. I'm not really sure though that preschool is that critical. I think kindergarten is really good. Preschool, I think, could be really helpful to people who are in these areas, in these populations that have achievement gaps and so forth. To me, the most important thing with education is really graduating high school and then actually post-secondary and trade schools and that sort of stuff. To me, that's the most important thing, and I don't know that preschool is really that critical.
Ms. Eaton?
I support universal public-funded preschool for all Minnesota 4-year-olds. I support keeping it voluntary and allow a mix of providers. I would require that the cost for public preschool be the same cost allowed for the private preschool. I would also require that the same credentialing be required for private as it is for public schools. I think it's one of the best investments we can make in our children to shrink the disparity gap and making sure that all kids can read by the 3rd grade.
Thank you. Mr. Kramer?
Thank you. If anybody here is familiar with my record in 8 years in Brooklyn Park, I voted consistently to give benefits and advancements and enhancements to the youth of our city. I agree that we should, to the extent possible, do everything we can to give a head start to our kids. But make no mistake about it, this is a taxpayer-funded mandate. I would propose instead that we look at a means testing system and help out those individuals that can least afford to get this type of benefit for their child and create that. I would support a mix because our teachers are already overtaxed. I mean, if you talk to teachers, they're doing a lot of work, and I wouldn't want to have them have additional responsibilities. So I think that would have to be a separate set of teachers working that program rather than putting an additional burden on teachers. So while I favor pieces of this, I don't favor it all, but I do agree that we need to give our kids the best start we can.
Mr. Nelson?
Thank you. I do support the Governor Dayton's proposal for child care. Studies have shown that the earlier you can get the kids starting to learn, the better they advance later on, and that earliest success or earliest learning is where they get the biggest bang for the buck. To get this accomplished, we're going to need all hands on board. Going to have to do a combination of public schools, of private schools, scholarships, the whole mix. We're going to have to do it to get this done. But it's a good proposal he has, and it'll help our kids transition into kindergarten and into 1st grade and getting to learn to read by 3rd grade so that they can succeed later on in life. Because believe it or not, we're going to need every one of these little kids in the future to be able to take care of us when we are old and in the nursing home.
Mr. Lundy?
I support targeted funding for pre-K relief for those students who need it the most. You know, it's been my privilege to be part of the White House initiative, My Brother's Keeper, and one of the stories that I've held to heart is a mayor from Mississippi, and he was talking about why do you focus? And he said, my city was so boring that you used to read the fire hydrant. And if you read a fire hydrant, you know what it says? Aim at fire. And what we need to do is target our resources at those in need. The people who are succeeding are not the ones who are falling behind. We need to tackle those who need that help specifically. We also need to work with all partners, including nonprofits who provide immense resources within our communities. And I'm not talking the tired old nonprofits in Minneapolis. I'm talking about the people here in the suburbs who are doing good work, but can't get funding because they don't stack up to the grant requirements. This is important stuff, and it's something I've advocated for. And until we tackle the root cause of this, which is poverty, we are not really serious about getting it done. You send me to State Senate, I'm going to fight the status quo that thinks that the results that we're delivering is acceptable.
Mr. Hoffman.
We know early education works. It's been my life's passion as I did early intervention services and actually got to work with the National Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center providing support. So that was North Carolina, and you know the studies that came out of North Carolina, what early intervention does work, and early childhood does work. This is especially true for children who live in poverty. The question comes up is how do we structure it and how do we pay for it? And 2 years ago, the governor's proposal that was free for all universal was met with some opposition, but what he created through conversations was an innovative nation-leading approach, which is a mixed delivery system, which allows partnerships with nonprofits, community-based organizations, child care centers, family child care providers, and the early childhood special education folks, Head Start, early Head Start. Let me talk about one example. In Coon Rapids, there's a New Horizons provider that partners with the Head Start and Early Head Start program and collaborates with the Anoka-Hennepin School District, and they all work on the same outcomes and benchmarks for the child. It's a good project.
Thank you. We're now moving on to the questions that are coming from the audience. So you have 30 seconds to respond to these questions. Our first one is, do you support MinCare as it is currently implemented? What would you change or improve? Our first responder is Ms. Eaton.
At the moment, it's best we've got, but I'm actually a universal health care supporter, the Minnesota health care plan. I believe that we need to get the insurance companies out of the business, and we need to put some controls on the pharmaceutical companies' drug prices.
Thank you. Mr. Kramer?
Thank you. No, I do not support the program as it currently exists. All you see in the newspaper is premiums going up 50, 60, 70% a year. When we're talking about affordability and access to health care, those types of increases are not sustainable, and they are not good for the residents of Minnesota.
Mr. Nelson?
I don't know if the questioner's confusing MinCare with MinSure. I think the previous answer was about MinSure. MinSure, there was problems with it, and we need to continue working on it to make it better, but MinSure is not the one that's raising the rates. It's the insurance companies that are. MinSure is a marketplace that they sell in, not any different than the mall down the street here that has a bunch of stores in there, and each one of those stores sets their prices, raises their rates or whatever. The owner of the property doesn't do that. MinSure doesn't do that with that. It's the insurance company do, and MinSure is just a marketplace that allows them a place to sell their product.
Mr. Lundy?
If the question's on MinCare, correct?
Yeah, I think so.
That's what it says, yeah.
Yeah, just want to make sure. I think that the biggest choice that we're facing is as you exhibit more government control over something, you limit choice. And when there's limited choice, prices always go up. Now, the prices may not be in someone's directly in their pocketbook, but it is going to hit the state budget. And I think long-term, we're going to have to take a hard look at that. How do we deliver savings? And what I always believe is that if you introduce the free market into these situations, you will see a betterment of pricing and the ability for the state to actually sustain this, because that is the biggest factor right now in this country is sustainability of these government programs.
Mr. Hoffman?
Thank you. Minnesota Care, and just so we can be all on the same level playing field, is Minnesota insurance for working poor. So those of you that are working that and might not perhaps have health insurance through your provider or might not get through the exchange, and that money is available through the Health Care Access Fund. That program does work, because if you didn't have that program, people would be utilizing the emergency room as their primary care physician, and that works. The thing that I want to see change in that, there's still down some MA spend down provisions for people with disabilities and people in poverty that we need to really, really take a look at.
Mr. Marvin?
Can I get the question? I'm pretty sure it's MinCare. I just wanted to make sure I had the question right, because it seems like people have been switching it.
it says MinCare.
Well, I know MinCare, but what was the rest of the question?
Do you support it as it is currently implemented? What would you change or improve?
One of the things I think about MinCare, I think MinCare is this. I'm not an expert on this stuff because I haven't been in the Senate for a long time or anything. But I think MinCare is the program that was before Obamacare even came along. I think it was a program for, like Senator Hoffman mentioned, it was for the working. It was really for the poor people, and it was kind of trying to address the fact that we had people who were not insured and they had needed coverage. That's my understanding of it, and I know there's a lot of people in our communities who had MinCare, and they wound up using MinCare because they were termed frequent flyers, for example, and they were using and that was something that was maybe it was what we were doing. Thank you.
Okay. Our next question. What would you do or propose to improve workforce development in Minnesota? Our first responder is Mr. Crema.
Before I respond to that question, I want to apologize. I heard MinCare, so I'm sorry I confused the panel up here and the audience.
Oh, that's okay.
I think the first thing that we have to deal with is accessibility to programs to provide educational benefits to enter the workforce. What are the needs and how can we help people succeed in a career path? That simple. We're not changing fast enough with what we're doing, so create opportunities to get the education that will lead to sustainable jobs to feed your families.
Mr. Lundy.
As a full-time faculty member at Hennepin Technical College, it's one of the things I work on every day is helping people change their careers. I think one of the challenges for DEED is that they're not keeping up with those changes. They're not being innovative. We've got a system that represents all of the Minnesota and not representing, this diverse city. We have different needs. We have people who don't speak English as well. They may not have been born here. And a lot of them are missing out on that training and that ability to keep their career moving forward because they don't have access, or what's being offered, frankly, is of no value. And so I think that what we need is to take a look at a partnership between private business and our workforce training.
Mr. Marvin.
I got to apologize because I didn't even hear you read the question.
It's because you were chatting.
I was talking, yeah. Sorry.
Chatty Cathy's over there. Okay.
We were talking. So.
Yes, I know.
Bad.
What would you do to provide?
That's what we do. We work across the aisle, actually talk to each other.
It's time
and
to
we're
listen
friendly.
now.
So.
It's time to listen now.
Yeah.
Okay. What would you do or propose to improve workforce development in Minnesota?
Well, I'm a big advocate of education, so I would push education. But I also really am a big advocate of getting jobs and going out there and working. My son, for example, he does a lot of things with welding. He's kind of really good at it. And I always try to get my kids to get out there and to learn things and earn skills and be better at things. And I think all of our people, we should be trying to encourage them to get out there and get more skills and develop more marketable skills that get them more income. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson.
Workforce development is a big issue. And part of it, the first questions we had dealing with transportation are part of it. I was at a meeting this morning with some business leaders in our community, and they were saying that one of the problems they have is getting enough skilled people skilled technicians into their shop to be able to work. They can't hire enough. They can't find them. They're going out of state and recruiting people to come here. And one of the things they said was the biggest problem is a lot of the people in the north side of Minneapolis and even in Brooklyn Center, Brooklyn Park, don't have transportation to get to the job sites. So this should be tied in. It has to be tied in all together as with transportation and
Thank you.
Education.
Mr. Hoffman.
I was honored and proud to be a co-author of many bills that were added, and with our Senate Equity Committee, the equity article that had $35 million that addressed some issues, and I'm gonna be really fast on them. For example, the community-based organization serving Somali youth, I was a co-author. That's $2 million that targets that population so that they can get invested into programs that are going to get them jobs. As we look at Youth at Work grant program, opportunity piece that's in there, and the Construction Careers Foundation, which also targets the populations of low income and populations of immigrant youth in order to get them. I was proud to be part of that huge equity piece that happened this year, and I want to do more.
Thank you. Ms. Eaton.
Well, as Representative Nelson said, it's a very complicated issue. I think we need to do more of the pipeline type of thing where our community colleges work with businesses and they train people for the jobs in our community. And up in northern Minnesota, the issue is that they don't have enough housing to have people come in and work in their factories. And then as Representative Nelson said, the dealership we were at this morning, they can't get people there who are willing to work in the shop because they haven't understood that it pays so much better now. It's more of an IT job.
Thank you. What options do you support to reduce the cost of higher education in Minnesota? Kind of goes with the workforce thing, I think. Mr. Nelson.
This is something that in the past 20 years that we've switched over the way we pay for higher education. Back when I was coming out of high school, the state basically paid for 2/3 of the cost by supporting the schools, and the student paid for 1/3 of the cost and covered that. And so that people could work a part-time job, minimum wage job, and go to school and pay for it as they got out of it, and not have huge debt. Over the last 20 years, we have switched over from high support of the schools to high tuition, and then we're going to support the students. Well, they raised the tuitions, they took the support away from the schools, but we haven't kept up with the cost, or the...
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Crew, I know, 30 seconds, solve the world. Mr. Crema.
Sorry, you threw me there. I thought you were going that way.
I know, you have to pay attention.
Confusing us.
This question's really important to me. I've got one kid who started college this year, and I just figured out in 4 years I'm going to have 2 in college, and I'm going, oh, that's going to be a really bad year. A couple of things I think we need to look at. We should freeze tuition. We need to increase the tax credit for families that are trying to put some money away for their kids in the 529 plans. We've got to increase the deductions that people are paying for their interest and their tuition. But the big thing is we've got to look at ways to make education more affordable. Like I said, let's freeze tuition. Let's consider programs that will make it affordable at the beginning and then give you a little break on your student loan debt when you come out.
Mr. Hoffman.
Higher education costs are really it's causing families to really have some serious discussions, and we see that you're putting that cost on a credit card. We were able to freeze tuition up and through the 17 and 18 school years, but one of the things we need to look at is the success that you have in the partnership between the community colleges and the career tech education folks and our PSEO within our high schools. Last year, over $10 million was saved in families' budgets because of the fact that PSEO works within just the Anoka-Hennepin School District. I don't have the Osseo numbers, but I'm sure they're up there as well because you're talking about the same amount of people. And that, once you address that issue, then you start to see those lower costs come down.
Thank you.
I think especially with career tech ed.
Mr. Lundy.
I think it's important to have some honest conversations. I think that people are going to school for degrees that are not going to allow them to be paid money to pay for the loans. We've created this cycle of a system where we say, go get a 4-year degree, get a master's. I hear from business owners that they're saying they're retraining people with master's degree to do technical manufacturing. We need to get people with the idea that there are many ways to get a career. Sometimes a career can be found through a certificate. It doesn't need a 2-year commitment. We train people for roles, and we also set the expectations that they are embarking on a lifelong of learning because they need to stay relevant and current.
Ms. Eaton.
I met with the PSEO students at Brooklyn Center High School last week, and they were an impressive group. Trying to fit into 2 worlds is really complicated, especially at that age. But a lot of them are going to end up with an associate degree when they leave high school, which is going to save them 2 years of college. And I just think that that's the answer. We need to get more of that into the high schools, because otherwise these kids with student loans can't buy cars, they can't buy houses, they put off having families. It's just really important that we get the costs down.
Thank you. And Mr. Marvin.
Thank you. This is a really close issue to my heart because I got 3 kids in college right now. So, and I know college is very expensive. I love PSEO, like Senator Eaton was talking about. My youngest one, who's only 17 right now, he'll be turning 18 pretty soon, is in his 2nd year of PSEO. He's the National Honor Society president for his high school, Minneapolis school downtown. And he'll be getting his associate's degree pretty soon at the end of this school year. My oldest boy is taken after me with the electrical engineering degree. And he also got a very high scholarship because of his really good grades. So for me, one of my things that we do with my kids to try to reduce costs is to encourage them to do really well in school and get good grades and get scholarships.
Thank you. What specific ways would you propose to close the achievement gap? First responder will be Mr. Hoffman.
Equity funding within our two local school districts has been shown with the data with it that we do close the achievement gap. And one of the things that was there was the compensatory education model, and it should go statewide. And I wanted to go statewide with it because the data showed we closed the achievement gap down to 11% in both school districts, which is amazing, especially when you look at other districts our sizes that are sitting at 50% achievement gap. The other one is the investment in early childhood that puts the first, second, and third grade benchmarks into play immediately. Those kindergarten readiness folks are there because of all day, everyday kindergarten, and we did it, and we need to expand on that.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson?
As was said, equity funding is one way to do that. We also need to, the governor, that's part of the governor's program with the early education, getting the 4-year-olds into school. It's all those things can help us close the achievement gap. The biggest thing we can do to help that, though, is eliminate poverty, because it's probably shown that a lot of the people that are having trouble in school, it's because their parents are poor, they're moving from school district to school district, and they're not getting into the system and not learning and not able to be reading by 3rd grade, and so they don't succeed in school, and that causes that part of that equity gap.
Thank you. Ms. Eaton?
Well, as Representative Nelson said, poverty is the key. People who are impoverished have worse health care, they have worse education, worse earning potential, and I think we need to really work on that. But one of the things that's worked in our community is the community school at Brooklyn Center High School, where you bring in the health care into the school and you bring in the community into the school so that it's all one big support group. And I really think if we took that model out more into the other schools, it would be beneficial.
Mr. Marvin?
It looks like I kind of agree with Senator Eaton and Representative Hillstrom, Nelson, a little bit. I'm getting confused again, But anyway, but my big thing I think is it has a lot to do with poverty, and it also has a lot to do with families. And we need to work on trying to get people have stronger families, have parents that help their kids, and also try to get people working and get people more prosperous in our communities. And we'll really make a big difference in our achievement gaps. I definitely don't think that just throwing money at it helps. If you look at Minneapolis schools, for example, compared to Osseo, they're like $8,000 per student more, and it's not helping.
Thank you. Mr. Lundy?
I think, money is not always the answer. In fact, it seldom is. We have a achievement gap that is among the worst in the country, yet we have high spending on education. What I think the focus is we need to kind of combat that status quo that says everything is normal, let's just keep going what we're doing. It was my privilege. I took a year of career change, and I went to work at a high-poverty school. And what I saw inside that school can't be summed up in 30 seconds, but I can tell you it was eye-opening. And I don't believe either party is adequately addressing it, because I watch at the proposals and I see with my own eyes what would happen in that school. And I don't believe that either party is really serious about tackling this.
Thank you. Mr. Kramer?
Thank you. I agree that maybe dealing with children at 4 years old and getting them into programs may be helpful, but that ignores an entire generation that's in school now. We've got an achievement gap that's worse than most southern states, and we pride ourselves on having a better educational system. Teachers are great. Remove a lot of mandates on them. Give them the ability and the time to spend time teaching students, not teaching them how to take a standardized test, but actually spending time teaching, and work on developing those types of programs that'll allow teachers to teach.
Okay. Next question. Affordable housing needs are at a crisis level across our state. What type of funding sources and potential solutions do you support? First responder is Ms. Eaton.
One of the solutions that we proposed in the tax committee was to allow an exception in the TIF spending to build housing for communities that were desperate for it, such as for the I think it's Polaris up there that didn't have any housing for workers, that it costs more to put in apartments than they can charge for an apartment. They can't even break even. So I think that's a start anyway, and we did put a lot of funding into affordable housing this year.
Mr. Hoffman?
It was one of the priorities that came about when I was elected in 2012, and in 2013, we actually targeted about $100 million to start to address the problem. And we also need to address the problem of that the rental costs are going up through the roof as well due to the fact you don't have good home ownership. Some of the things that you need to look at is when somebody doesn't have a credit, when they don't have good credit, how are you going to be able to establish that good credit if you can't go and get that house? We need to have some flexibility in how we give out those. And I like what Habitat for Humanity is doing when they get this barter system put in place, and it works. I think you can expand on something like that. There are great housing needs.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson?
Thank you. Affordable housing is another tough subject that we have. I think part of the problem is, coming from a construction background, is developers look at where the money is. And there isn't a lot of money, and they're not making a profit building apartments for low-rent apartments. So we're going to need to come up with some way of helping the developers on the front end so that when they're building these projects, they're building affordable homes. It costs just about as much to build a low-income house or affordable house as a high-end house, and the profit's a lot more. And developers, being smart individuals, they're putting their money in building the houses that they're going to make the most profit at. So we need to do that in the front end.
Thank you. Mr. Marvin?
Hello. In our communities here in Brooklyn Center, Brooklyn Park, we have a lot of affordable housing. Some people might feel we don't have enough, but in Brooklyn Center, for example, we have, out of all the cities in Hennepin County, Brooklyn Center's average property values are the lowest. Brooklyn Park has got fairly low property values on average as well. I think what we need to be working on as far as affordable housing is spreading this around more to all these communities. Some of these communities, according to my research paper here, have average home values of $1 million. And so I think if we got more affordable housing in these communities that are wealthier, it might be good. I agree with Mr. Hoffman, or Senator Hoffman, about reducing the rental costs. Oh, sorry. Thank you.
It's okay. Mr. Kerma?
Thank you. I agree. We need to look at where the money is at in the process. Follow the money. Let's start with it and figure out a way that we can give maybe developers a tax incentive for, instead of trying to build the biggest piece of property they can on that house, making it affordable property. The second thing we need to look at is, where is the need for affordable housing? We don't want to concentrate affordable housing in one city and say, hey, we've done what we need to do. We need to spread affordable housing out throughout our communities to give individuals access to that housing, access to jobs in different cities, and instead of just creating an area where then you've taken that community and lowered its tax base.
Thank you. Mr. Lundy?
As the mayor of Brooklyn Park, where 63% of our city is deemed affordable by the market, I live, eat, and breathe this issue. It's not a simple solution. The city is suing the Met Council simply because they have policies that have led to the concentration of poverty, the concentration of affordable housing. And that kind of policies doesn't lead us to a solution. I also think the other part about affordability is trying to tackle that root cause of poverty. If you can raise people's income, you change their life in so many ways. You change in education, you change in affordability for housing. Tackle poverty, and we will start to see those effects that go across many spectrums of what the issues we've been talking about tonight.
Thank you. How would you propose identifying and treating youth with mental health issues? First responder will be Mr. Crema.
Thank you. I have an 18-year-old son in college. I have a 16-year-old son in high school, and I see these issues with their friends and with people at school. This has to be a situation that's attacked on multiple different levels. We need to have the schools involved making referrals to appropriate agencies. We need to have police. These shouldn't be criminal issues. They should be referrals into community organizations where everyone works together to help that child not end up being imprisoned because they've got a mental health issue. Helping them try and address that needs through counseling, medication, or whatever the appropriate issue might be, but it has to be done together.
Ms. Eaton?
I think we need to start with adding more counselors in the schools to do the assessments. Right now, it's like 1 to 800 students. We're one of the lowest in the country. And it's really hard when the teacher has a classroom of 30-some kids to do those assessments accurately on the children. They need that help. We need the professionals in the schools.
Mr. Marvin?
This is a tough question, really. I'm not a doctor or a medical professional, and diagnosing mental health is not my thing. But I think it's very, very important for us to be looking out for the kids and looking out for our people in general. And if we're if we're finding people that have got addiction problems, and we've got people who have issues with suicide, and we've got all of these issues, we need to be trying to identify those kids and getting those kids their help. And a lot of these issues with mental health and stuff are going to drag these kids down. And if we can figure out how to help turn that around, we'll have more successful population, we'll have less crime, and we'll make things better for everybody. So it's important.
Mr. Nelson?
This is another issue that goes back, as we talked earlier about the tax issue. Back when the state was in had budget issues and we were making cuts, education being the largest part of our state budget, they took big cuts. And the schools looked at, well, do I keep teachers in the classroom or do we keep a counselor here to help the kids? And they kept teachers in the classroom because that's their primary mission. And so we need to put more counselors in the schools. We need to put our school nurses in the schools so that they can identify these problems they have and move the kids get the help that they need.
Mr. Lundy?
There's a few things. First, I've been proud to lead a conversation in our community, in this room, talking about prayer care and talking about the need for approving health care for youth. I think one of the things the state does is it limits the number of options that parents have. Prayer care, when they moved here, they told me about how the state limits the number of beds that is offered in the state for mental health issues. That there were people who are going to drive down from Duluth to come to Brooklyn Park to go to prayer care with their child because there was no services up there. The fact is the state is limiting the number of options for parents and for providers by not letting us have enough of them. We have a shortage. We should address the shortage.
Thank you. And Mr. Hoffman?
Having served 8 years on the Anoka-Hennepin School Board, the largest school district in the state of Minnesota, those mental health issues did come forward to us, and it was based on, Chris and Mike are right, when the deficits and the cuts were happening, there was less resources to our school counselors. So when I got elected, the first thing I got to do was to be the author of a school-based mental health bill, and it allowed $10 million. It was a small fix, $10 million, but it got the collaborative partnership with third-party interests, folks, counselors outside that would work through the health care system in with the school districts to help parents and teachers and youth that were involved. That needs to be expanded.
Thank you. Next question. What proposals do you have to improve relations between law enforcement and minority communities? First responder is Mr. Marvin.
Well, I think that we do a lot of good things with outreach. For example, going to these events. You know, as far as a good example is my mother-in-law. You know, my wife's from China, and my mother-in-law would come to live with us for long periods of time. One time, she was with us for 2.5 years. In Brooklyn Center, we had an officer, Carlos, who has moved on to St. Paul, and he could speak Mandarin Chinese. And Officer Carlos is also kind of famous in terms of being able to do voices and so forth. And he's really a good guy, you know, and I like him. I even know where he lives now. So, and the thing, you know, he's still a friend of mine from 20 years ago almost. But, you know, that's how you really outreach, is you make friends with the people and be approachable.
Mr. Hoffman?
Anytime we have a conversation regarding public safety and the population at hand, and specifically here with minority populations, it's about creating a safe environment that is worthy of trust, and the only way to get that is to get to know one another. And you see some good efforts out there of outreach with minority populations within the communities to create a task force that works together, and you've seen some cities do that, and at the end of the day, there's some building of trust that occurs within that, and once that can happen, those issues can be addressed. I've seen that firsthand, and I know we can continue on doing that.
Mr. Lundy?
There is no single issue that dominates what I do more than this issue in front of Brooklyn Park. This took decades to get to this point, and the idea that somehow a couple weeks or a program is going to fix it is simply not looking at it the right way. It is going to take decades to fix it. It's going to come with trust, and it's going to take that hard step time and time again. What we need to do is help get diversification of our police force, getting different people involved with that. We need to open dialogues. But one thing I saw, and I will not support, is the idea that the state government should have a say in this, because I think passing a one-size-fit-all solution will not work. The problems affecting Brooklyn Park are different than what's up in War Road, and I think any law that treats us the same is the wrong approach.
Thank you. Mr. Kramer.
Thank you. It all boils down to dialogue and communication. Brooklyn Park has done a fantastic job with innovative policing over the last several years to reduce crime and help make our neighborhoods safer. They are. Crime is at a 30-year low, and we've got 25,000 more people here. But it starts with communication, particularly in the communities that are most affected by crime or violence in our neighborhood. So we need to keep that dialogue open, we need to keep communicating, and we need to keep making positive steps where everyone has a voice. You might not like the decision at the end of the day, but you appreciate it more if you've been heard. So keep the dialogue open.
Ms. Eaton.
There's not too much to disagree with what people have said. I think we do need to diversify our police force. But another piece that I like what we do in Brooklyn Center is we bring a lot of these kids in like as cadets or whatever that work with the police officers in the police department. And most of them are people of color, and they get an experience with a friendship with the police officers. I also think we need to provide more equipment for the police so that they have alternatives to lethal force. I know that some departments don't have tasers, and we really need something better.
And Mr. Nelson.
I too will echo whatever's been said up here. Dialogue and trust. We need to have that trust and mutual respect on both sides of that issue. And an example of that is last week when North Carolina, or 2 weeks ago, North Carolina and Oklahoma both had police shootings. And we know what's happened in North Carolina. But because of Oklahoma's, they've done the things ahead of time. They've done the dialogue. They kept the respect up. They kept the channels of communication open. They were able to get through this without the violence, and they're able, and continuing to work on that. We need to do the same thing here. Continue that dialogue and make sure that both sides respect each other.
Trying to decide what the last one should be here. Just a few more questions. Okay, here we go. Should food and clothing be taxed? Why or why not? First responder will be Mr. Nelson.
I would say no. We currently do not tax food and clothing in the state, and that would be a huge tax going on to the middle class and the poor and our seniors, because they don't, they're buying basic clothes and the basic food, and it would not raise that much tax, and I would not support putting the sales tax on food and clothing.
Mr. Kramer?
Thank you. I wouldn't support taxing those items either, even though we all need food and clothing. I mean, that's going to be a tax that's going to disproportionately affect those that can least afford it. A single mother that's trying to buy food for her kids, buy school clothes, our senior citizens that are on a fixed income. No, do not tax food and clothing, ever.
Mr. Hoffman?
The answer simple to that is no, I do not think you should, because it is a regressive sales tax, and when you're talking about some of the staples that people need, that's a little bit beyond what we should be doing, so no.
Ms. Eaton?
We actually tried to tax clothing in the tax committee, and the Mall of America was very angry. Apparently, a lot of people come from all over the world to the Mall of America because we don't have a clothing tax. What we wanted to do was expand the sales tax so we could lower it, and so far we haven't found anybody willing to have their product expanded onto.
There you go. Mr. Marvin?
Well, I think I agree with everybody except maybe for Senator Eaton. I don't really believe in raising taxes. Normally I'm generally opposed to raising taxes. I know that I would be opposed to it. Thank you.
Mr. Lundy?
I wouldn't, of course. And I think what's more importantly is take a look at all the different ways in which we tax people. When you go and get your car tabs, those increased. That's just as regressive as these, but I don't hear people talking about what we can do to lower those. We talk about cigarette tax, we talk about all kinds of taxes, and people want to get this myth that somehow we're taxing only the rich. Well, you know what? Cost of living is going up. People's health care costs continue to rise. And these things hit people's pocketbooks, and I think that there are rules or ways that we can address these. And the idea that only these little ones are bad, but these other ones are okay because they hit or don't hit people, they all hit people.
Thank you. We're going to move on to our closing question, and we'll go in the reverse order in which we started. So in summary, how do you intend to best serve your district and move the state forward? So our candidate for Senate seat 40 is Chris Eaton.
I want to thank my constituents for giving me the honor of representing them for the last 5 years. I will continue to listen to my constituents and address the concerns brought to me. We have a diverse community, and we have multiple needs. I will try to keep connected to all the different groups and maintain communication with their leadership. My goal is to address the needs of Brooklyn Center and Brooklyn Park in the Senate. The core of my campaign and Senate service has been social justice. I have an open door and readily welcome all concerns, ideas, and complaints. Thank you.
Okay. And our other candidate for Senate seat 40 is Mr. Robert Marvin.
Hi, thank you. My wife Molly and Marvin and I have lived here for 20 years, and we've raised 3 boys. Our city is one of the highest tax rates in the entire state. Our people can't afford to have a senator that votes for every tax increase that comes along or hijacks bonding bills for important things like roads and bridges, for boondoggle like Southwest Light Rail, or for a $90 million office building. We need moral leadership. We need to protect the unborn. We need to keep the boys out of the girls' locker rooms and showers, and we need to promote high school graduation rates, close that achievement gap. We need to promote families. We need to reduce youth crime. And I'm running for Senate because I really care about this community, and I'm hoping that I can help make a difference. And I hope that you guys care too, because it's really important that we pull together. I've been trying to work across the aisle, even right here, with Senator Hoffman, and he's been, it's been pretty good there. And then we can do better. And my name is Rob Marvin, and I'm running for Senate here in SD 40. And please vote for me on November 8th. Thanks.
Thank you. And our candidate for Senate seat 36 is John Hoffman.
4 years ago, I ran to be your state senator, and in 4 years, we've accomplished a lot. One of the first things we did is we stopped putting our education costs on a credit card. Remember when the school districts had to borrow $2.6 billion, that's with a B dollars? We paid that back the first year, and that's something that we should never do in the future, and I promise you that will never happen under my watch. We worked for all-day, everyday kindergarten, and now we have all-day, everyday kindergarten. I said we wanted to have equity funding for the Anoka, Hennepin, and the Osseo school districts, and I secured $10 million for our students in poverty. We did the equity funding for Anoka, Hennepin, and Osseo. We created jobs, and the unemployment rate was 6%, 5.6%. Now it's a healthy 3.8%. With my advocacy and support, we added the 610, then we added the Highway 10, and the numerous businesses that are benefiting from the work that has been done before us. The ability to stop that is now, or to be able to continue that, to finish it is now. And we got off the fiscal roller coaster. We now have an honest, balanced budget with no gimmicks, and it's pay-as-you-go system.
And our other candidate for Senate District 36 is Mr. Jeff Lundy.
I want to thank everybody again for all the hard work that goes into hosting this. Anybody who knows me as mayor of Brooklyn Park knows there's one absolute irretrievable fact, and that is that I focus on getting stuff done. I don't yield to anything. I march to my own drum. I will work across party lines to move mountains to get this city moving forward. And as your state senator, I'm going to take that same tack. When I ran as mayor, I said I was going to cut crime, that I was going to bring jobs here, that I was going to bring people together. Brooklyn Park has 1/3 the crime it had, despite having 25,000 more people. We've brought in nearly $1 billion, and I think it is now $1 billion because you've got a new development coming in. That focus and that ability to work across lines to bring the most diverse city in the state of Minnesota to do that, different cultures, different languages, and every day I work on making sure I bridge that gap. If I go to the Capitol and work for you, I'm going to make sure that we deliver those kind of results, that we pull people together and stop penalizing the state of Minnesota and the people for the inability of legislators to get stuff done and work together. Thank you.
Our lone candidate for Representative 40A is Michael Nelson.
Thank you. And as we wind down this upcoming election season, We need to make sure we don't get caught up in the hoopla that's going on. Good jobs that pay livable wages and a strong education system that prepares our children and our grandchildren to become contributing members of our society is still the most important issues for all of us. I will continue to work across the aisle to make sure we continue to invest in good schools for our children, a comprehensive transportation system that works for everyone, that includes good roads, quality public transit, so we can get to our jobs, to shopping, to recreation, and the religious institution of our choice. Public safety is another issue we need to make sure so we can feel safe in our homes and in our communities. And these are not easy, there are no easy answers to these issues, but if we all work together, we can come up with solutions that make our community better. It has been my honor to serve you in the Minnesota legislature, and I ask for your vote on November 8th.
Thank you. And we have two candidates vying for your vote in Representative District 36B. One is Melissa Hortman, who is unable to be here this evening. She's actually out of state. And her website is melissahortman.com. Feel free to contact her with your concerns. And our other candidate is Mr. Peter Crema.
In closing, I again thank the League and the Chamber for sponsoring this event tonight. I thank you all for sitting here now at 9:22 in the evening and taking the time to be informed voters. First and foremost, the way I intend to serve this community is the way I've always done it, and that's be in the community. You go to the Tater Days, you go to the Schmelt Fry, you'll see me here. You'll have the ability to talk to me. If you look at my campaign literature, that's my cell phone number on there. For 8 years, I've had my cell phone number be the only number people can reach me at. I'll give you the access and the ability to be heard. I may not get done what you want to get done. I may not agree with you, but the ability to be heard is key. I've been married for 22 years. I'm not sure if I'm great at compromise or my wife is great at compromise, but I think we both are. And that's part of what has to happen in this situation is we have to get things done. We cannot let our ideology of whatever party we represent stop us from making progress for our citizens. And that's what I do. We all talked about reaching across the aisle tonight and trying to get things done. We've done that in Brooklyn Park. We've had success, and I would bring that to the state to make it better than when I got there. Thank you.
Thank you once again on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Brooklyn Park, Osseo, and Maple Grove, and the North Hennepin Area Chamber of Commerce. I would like to thank the candidates for agreeing to participate in tonight's forum. I would like to thank the voters for attending and participating by submitting excellent questions, and I would like to thank the viewing audience as well. Remember, if we could not get to your question tonight or you have further questions for the candidates, we invite you to contact them directly with your concerns. Make sure you get out and register to vote. We do have forms at the back table, or you can always visit the Secretary of State's website. And remember to get out on or by Tuesday, November 8th, as in this election, your vote truly counts. Thank you and have a